Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, good evening, or this might be a replay for you. This is the Chicken Box. I'm your host or co-host, Impeccable, along with Jay Jackson, and we're powered by the Afro. Man, we just had a birthday, Jay, last couple weeks ago, right?
That's right.
August 13th, Afro turned 134 years. Man, we had a great Black Business Matters conference right at the Reginald Lewis Museum. It was fantastic, and it was all about AI. If you missed it, maybe we'll show some clips. No, AI is everywhere, but you better be up on it besides just doing your schoolwork. We have something special happening for us today, and it's Black people versus trying to live, not just survive. We have some wonderful guests coming in. If this is your very first time on the Chicken Box, if you're from Baltimore, you pretty much know what it is. It's four wings, fries, potatoes, salt, pepper, ketchup, maybe hot sauce if you like it. If it's styrofoam and it's steaming hot, you know that box is going to be melting. But man, I get hungry every time I say that. You know how you can smell chicken? It's terrible, right? You can just smell fried chicken at any moment in your brain. You can just think about it and smell it. Anyway, I'm on to the air fryer now, but I still think about those fried chicken moments of the chicken box. But here on the show is where you speak your truth. We have different guests and different topics, and we don't all have to agree. Isn't that beautiful? If Jay wants to wear a teal shirt and I want to wear a black one, we're still friends. Who's mad at him? I'm not.
Very good.
If you don't agree with my opinion, I'm not your friend anymore. I'm tired of hearing that. Anyway, we have some special guests joining us today. Jay, if you invite our or officially invite our guests, let's get a conversation started. Trying to live, not just survive. I love that.
All right. So today on the show, we have Franklyn Baker and Aleksey Reshetnikov, Ph.D. Franklyn Baker is a cross-functional senior executive with 30 years of diverse expertise in nonprofit organizations. He has been the president and CEO of United Way of Central Maryland since 2016. Under his leadership, the organization has experienced measurable shifts in culture by championing equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts, as well as a notable growth in revenue, people served, innovative programs, volunteers engaged, and much more. During his tenure, United Way has expanded its homelessness, prevention, and family stability work to 8 sites, spearheaded new educational equity initiatives, expanded its veterans treatment court program for 1 to 6 regions, and new family centers providing affordable childcare and early childhood education. Aleksey Reshetnikov, Ph.D., has earned his Ph.D. in sociology from Washington State University in 2022. He previously worked at Bates College in Lewiston, Maine, and a visiting assistant professor of sociology. He has published academic research on social inequality, library access, and arts-based methodology. He is currently the Senior Director of Research at United Way of Central Maryland, leading data analysis research team. His team collects, analyzes, and translates data and research around strengths and challenges in the Central Maryland region. As an immigrant from Ukraine, he is immensely passionate about understanding and addressing socioeconomic disadvantages. He currently lives in Baltimore County with his wife and German Shepherd. Welcome, you two. Franklyn, welcome back. You've been on the show a number of times.
Thank you, Jay.
All right.
Glad to be on again.
Absolutely.
Man, he said German Shepherd. They gave me some sound effects. Let's see if it works. Oh, there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, they have made it onto the show from the United Way.
Working, you know what that is. So
I had a German Shepherd. I know this is not about German Shepherds, but when you have a certain dog, you kind of just have that moment, that dog moment.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a connection.
when you have the German Shepherd show, invite me back on because I could talk about that all day.
Fair enough.
I'm ready for that, Aleksey. Let's jump right in. Okay, trying to live, not survive. Why don't you give us the current mission, Franklyn, of the United Way and of the United Way of Central Maryland, so we can get started. A lot of people have seen commercials, they heard of United Way, but do they really know what you guys do?
Yeah, thank you so much, Impeccable. I am so glad to be on today. This is probably my 3rd tour of duty with Chicken Box. Love it every time. 3 times the charm, though, right, Jay? 3 times the charm.
Too, boy. You're clean today, I must say. Impeccable.
Yes. And so United Way is the way. United Way is the way towards stable housing. United is the way for better learning in school. United is the way to help people who are veterans to get back on their feet. United really is the way to figure out how do we work with communities to embolden people to get smarter on the ground about policy that affects their life. United is the way to partner with so many entities like the Afro to get word out about what's important for our community and to galvanize our community to act, right, and mobilize our community to really be very clear about data and information, how that may inform how we engage in community. But our vision, and this is just a powerful vision from my perspective, is just we envision a world where everyone thrives, right? Everyone is not just surviving, as you said, Impeccable, but everyone is thriving, right? That's a very aspirational vision, but I think it's a vision that mobilizes and motivates all of us to do more than just our part. You do your part and you bring others, you enroll and you mobilize others to get engaged. That's one of the superpowers of United Way in the US, United Ways around the world, is we're looked to by so many as an agent for change. And part of being that agent for change is leveraging data like we're going to talk about today, but leveraging relationships, right? Because that old saying, Impeccable, is not just what you know, it's who you know. So you can have all the data that Aleksey, our team member, is going to share today, but if that's not paired with who you know that can get things done and use of the data, then it's really a hill of beans, as they say, right? So yeah, that's what United Way is. We're proud to be a part of this, we call it movement. Our local United Way, Impeccable and Jay, we've been around for 100 plus years now. We celebrated 100th anniversary last year, and we're looking for the next impact of the next century, right, of service. And so glad to be on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for visionary leadership. Data is all around us.
Yeah.
Like collecting. I'm wondering what's listening to me. I'm looking at my coffee pot. I'm saying everybody is just collecting data. And Aleksey, you are the data guru from what I'm hearing from Franklyn. And how are you what data are you collecting that's most useful to thrive, not just survive? And how are you guys applying that data?
Yeah, and I appreciate being called the data guru. I'll take it. I'll put it on my business card. I'll send it out. So that's out there in the world now. So there's really two streams of data I think that are worth talking about in this case. And I appreciate you mentioning how all of this data is collected, because data in 2026 is so valuable. I mean, all of our AI models, and AI is such a big buzzword. I know y'all have talked about AI recently. That's based on all of our data, right? That your toaster collecting that data, that's for AI to figure out. So we really want to take a soft hand approach to data and make sure that we don't collect data when we don't need to collect data. So there's two sides of kind of the big data area we take. The first is the stuff we collect internally. And Franklyn mentioned a lot of the work we do, whether it's with veterans, whether it's with housing, whether it's with young men of color in Baltimore City. All of this stuff is programmatic work that needs to be verified with some level of data. So we do collect data internally on those programs. And a lot of it is just to know, are we doing the things we're supposed to be doing? Are our programs being impactful? And if they're not, how do we make them impactful? Because we can act as much as we want, but if we're not making an impact, then at that point, what are we spending our time and money on? So that's one side of the data. The other side, and I think this is where our conversation is going today, is this idea of the ALICE data. So that is our asset limited, income constrained, employed population. And Franklyn already mentioned it, part of this movement. It is looking at the essentials of what it costs to live in this country and in particular jurisdictions. I think we all know it's a different cost of living in, say, Las Vegas than it is Baltimore, than it is New York. A dollar is not going to take you the same place in each one of those places. So this is a national project out of the United Way of Northern New Jersey, where they use a lot of federal data. I mean, I'm talking the United States Census Bureau. At some point, they bring in the FTC's telecommunications data to see how much people are charging for cell phones and things like that. They work with the AAA to understand insurance prices. So all of these publicly available data sources, the Consumer Price Index, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, putting them together and actually figuring out, hey, what does it cost to live in this country? And so that is really, I think, where the crux of this conversation is going today. And it is just so robust and gives us such a great insight into what it actually costs to live in a place.
And one of the questions, not questions, but one of the comments I wanted to make to add on to everything Aleksey just said is in this current climate, where the buzzword is affordability, right? And probably many of your conversations with other guests is in this space of what does that mean? When you talk about affordability and what actions, what policies need to happen to make sure that is part of the reality that we're experiencing in our different communities. Well, this Alice report that was just explained by Aleksey is just very, very relevant in the current climate, right? Because there's debates back and forth. What does it really mean when you've arrived as a household at the place where you're able to afford healthcare, right? And childcare and transportation and all those things. So Aleksey will certainly take some time with you all and your guests who are watching now to just sort of walk through that. Like, what does that really mean and how do we get there, right? So we're really glad to be on, Jay and Impeccable, and hopefully we can get some questions answered by some of your viewers, today.
You are the third co-host today, Franklin, and you're going to be interviewing Aleksey.
Wouldn't be the first time.
That's right. That's right.
Jay, jump in, my friend.
Okay, so the Alice report, as Aleksey had mentioned, the asset limited income constrained employed. This report you guys do, I guess, every other year or annually. My question is, for people who generally think that poverty is just not having a job, this report, one of the bigger stats that kind of jumped out is that 39% of Maryland households, 934,000 families roughly, actually fall below this Alice threshold. Like, that's not really a fringe statistic, right? It's kind of it's kind of a big deal. Why is that number not registering as more of a crisis to people as this report came out? And this is a question for both of you.
Yeah, and I can start with some context here too.
Sure.
The federal poverty level. So that's the number we tend to use when we think about folks who are struggling. What is often lost in that idea is how low that number actually is. And I have shouted this from the rooftops. The federal poverty level is a measure that was created in like 1964 by a career bureaucrat who took the basic level starvation food budget and multiplied it by 3. And that's what we decided was surviving. And so the idea here was that people are supposed to spend a third of their money on food. That's not the case today. Molly Orshansky, who created this measure, she wasn't thinking about technology, the cost of transportation, the crazy rises in housing costs, the rising utility costs, right? A third of your money is not going towards food anymore. So all of that to say that this measure is super outdated. In 2024, which our Alice data is reflecting, a family of 4, that federal poverty level that we often think about as struggle and is often reported by the federal government, by the news, is $31,200.
Right.
That is not enough to survive. So I'm adding that context because it is such a big gap between what the actual survival budget is, which is around $108,000 in the state of Maryland, that, it's hard to make that gap make sense to folks when we spend so much time talking about poverty.
Yeah, I mean, it's a curious sort of situation, right? Where you have folks who are, the like you said, the federal poverty line hasn't been updated since the 1960s. It doesn't account for inflation. I mean, even if you're not talking about from the threshold, or from the timeline of the 60s to now, like that's already a big enough gap in difference in data. But even talking in the last, I don't know, 1.5 years randomly, where the price of gasoline and diesel and everything else has driven the price up of food very specifically, right? Is there any push from a federal level? I'm just curious if you are aware of this. Is there any push to update the federal poverty line to sort of be in line with inflation, to kind of make the data that you guys are collecting and others are collecting to be at least more accurate?
Jay, it's like you're in my head. So they do update the federal poverty line, adjusting for inflation every year, and so that is adjusted over the last 30 years to $31,000.
Wait,
About every
I'm sorry. That's a super important thing. The 31,000 is adjusted for inflation now.
Yes, so that
That's
is for
insane.
2026 or 2024 numbers, so, which should tell you how low that
Right.
calculation is. The problem is the calculation doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Three times the bare minimum food survival budget is not a lot.
Right.
Like if you wanted to go home, break down what you spend on food a month and see what that breaks down to, like, and again, survival. You know, the federal government talks about like $26 a week, you can make it work. So every decade or so since they introduced that federal poverty level, Congress has said, hey, let's check this out, see if it still makes sense to calculate it this way. Pretty much every decade. I think this is the first time in the last decade or so we haven't had Congress do this. They'll commission a study, and they'll say, does this calculation make sense and reflect poverty accurately? And every time the studies come back and said, no, it doesn't, you need to change this. And then they do it again a decade later. So they never actually have any action on this thing, apart from doing a study that almost universally says this method of calculation does not work.
Yeah, I mean, I just my speculation is that if you have to update it, then you have to really start to address just how many people are truly in poverty. So it's better to kind of keep the number low, right?
There's also this issue of, and this is part of the reason this ALICE budget is so important, we use the federal poverty level for SNAP, for TANF, we use it for all of our federal programs. If we update it and suddenly more people are on it, there's more money that needs to go into those programs. So I think that's really the big thing that's been holding the federal government back here.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, that would mean Medicaid would go up and everything else, right? Same idea. Franklyn, I want to ask you a question very specifically here. United Way of Central Maryland has expanded its homeless prevention, we talked about in your bio, to 8 states under your leadership. When you look at the ALICE data, particularly the part that says 73% of renters, households are below this threshold, they are rent burdened, as the report says. What does that tell you about the homelessness pipeline and where that kind of starts?
Yeah, and first, thank you for the question. We've expanded it to 8 sites. I think you said states, but
I'm sorry, 8 sites. I
yeah,
apologize.
8 sites, yeah. And I think it's very evident to us when we keep seeing every 2 years when the ALICE report is updated. So Aleksey is talking about the most recent update is based upon the 2024 data, because it takes a while, right, to actually compile the data, to work with the IRS and all those various agencies I mentioned. But it is so helpful to understand that the housing piece, we call it housing is health, because if you don't have stability in the housing space, right, either you're moving from place to place, or you're kind of going from a friend of yours, their couch, to under shantytown or under a bridge, or some other place in the community, that is health. So it starts with having stable housing, which is why we've been investing so much into creating more sites around the region, Central Maryland, to truly deal with it, not just place-based, but also connecting them to case management support, right? So they literally have someone who can walk them through securing a job, resume, support, the whole aspects of how is your health, actual health care? What are you plugged into, as opposed to just them leveraging the ER, for their healthcare source, right? So getting a full comprehensive wraparound support to those individuals who are housing insecure or who are on the verge of homelessness or who are homeless, right? Who are actually included in that every year, January point in time count by each location in our region. So it is so important just for your listeners to understand that we couldn't be more focused on housing. We couldn't be. I mean, it is such a viable part of what allows our community, and you were saying it earlier, Impeccable, to go from just trying to survive to thriving. That's first base, right? And so it is huge when we think about, and Aleksey can talk about the detail on this, but it's huge when we think about the rising, shifting costs of housing, right? It's amazing. And year over year, as I'm looking at the report, I've been looking at this report since 2016. And every year, every 2 years, we see the updated information. it just seems like housing continues to just steep up, right? And so it is very important to us, Jay, as an organization, and a lot of our partners that we work alongside, they also really, really understand it, right? That if we leave any legacy, it needs to be a legacy around how many people that we take from that vulnerable housing position to a place of stability, right?
Excellent.
Absolutely. If you just tuned in, you jumped in on the conversation, and maybe a lot of people didn't know. Trying to live, it seems like they try to suppress this data and this information, like Jay said, so everybody didn't go into a fear mode. But this is the Chicken Box, powered by the Afro News, and we have two of United Way's finest, Franklyn and Aleksey, who are bringing us not only from a practical, programmatic, as well as a data-driven approach to a lot of these problems that are existing. It makes you think about the number of households. I think a report shows that 47% are headed by 65 or older. How is this affecting our seniors at the moment? I mean, I know if they say you're just basically trying to live at 31,000, what is retirement looking like? And how are our seniors being taken care of at the moment?
So what's really fascinating about this report and this 65 plus group is that these are folks who are working. So this isn't even the retirement group. In the state of Maryland, and depending on who you ask, that's around a quarter of the 65 plus population is working either part-time or full-time. Nationally, it's around 20-ish%. And for context with those numbers, in like 1949, I want to say, we were at around 29% of 65 plus working. In around 1985, that goes down to around 11%. And in Maryland, we're back up to 25-ish, 26-ish%. So we're actually rising with the percentage of the senior population that is working. And to your point, Impeccable, almost half of those folks who are working, they're not doing it. Oftentimes we think about a group that's doing it because they love their work or they're in a high position and want to keep retaining that, C-suite kind of situation. No, these are folks who are struggling to make ends meet. And to your point, all of these things then funnel back into what does this look like for housing? What does this look like for healthcare, to Franklyn's point? What does this look like for food insecurity? We recently did a survey to our kind of constituents in Central Maryland, and the two things that came up that everyone's worried about, and this isn't going to surprise anyone on this call or anyone on watching this, food and utilities were the top two, followed by housing, right? So these are things that are real, that are costing folks. I also want to add, this is the fastest growing demographic in the US. So we've gotten really good at keeping folks alive longer. We have more of them because of generational shifts. Baby boomers are coming into that 65 plus group, and more of them are staying in the workforce than ever were before, and oftentimes focusing in on service sector work, whether it be, you sometimes see greeters at Walmart, greeters at stores. That's just an example. So we're going to see more of these folks who are going to continue struggling to make ends meet.
And it's like, that hits hard. Jay, I'm sorry. I just...
Yeah, no worries. Aleksey, actually, your point, I think, is that it kind of dovetails into my next question, which is the Alice report has what they refer to as essentials index, right? This is your housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, and technology. And that's increasing by 5.5% annually since the pandemic, which is always the looming thing in any of these socioeconomic conversations, is the pandemic is not really gone. You think it's gone, but it's still there. Now, it says that this is actually outpacing wider inflation, which I think is actually kind of fascinating in and of itself. Also, at the same time, 49% of black households in Maryland are below the threshold, which is nearly half, obviously. And you guys attribute that to longstanding discriminatory policies in housing, employment, and education. Is there a connection between, black households suffering those sort of longstanding things and then the pandemic increasing their situation, or making their situation worse, and how does that relate to sort of other communities in comparison? I don't know if the report breaks that out. So
Yes, go
go
for
ahead.
it, Franklin.
No, I mean, you can provide the stats. I'll just provide from color because we have some clear stats in terms of the disparity between the various races that we are tracking and the sort of longitudinal aspect of this. Because I think even pre-pandemic, there were clear signs of historical damaging set of lived experiences by various pockets of our population we serve. And then to your point, I guess, which most people listening would understand, the pandemic just exacerbated it. It just took it to a whole nother level. I mean, for example, we are 211, helpline that people can call for questions and get resources. We were going from about 100,000 or so calls a year. And then for the stretch of 2020, when the pandemic started, to about 2022 into 2023, we're averaging 2 or 3 times that, right? Just the sheer need and the availability of resources or scarcity of resources, et cetera. But, Aleksey can sort of talk a little bit more about kind of stats and to your question around, like, can we see it in the numbers? Like, can we see it in what we're experiencing in the community here in Greater Baltimore? Go ahead, Aleksey, whatever you can share.
Yeah, it's such a strange. I mean, I think we all remember the pandemic, or hopefully we've forgotten it at this point. It's 2026. It wasn't that long ago, right, where we had just all hunkered down. It is a really strange data situation where 2 things are happening at the same time. So one is that was the biggest wealth transfer we had from the federal government since the 80s, essentially, to folks directly, whether it was cash infusions, many states stopping evictions, looking at things like expanding unemployment benefits, right? So we actually had a lot of money funneling back to people to try to offset the issues of the pandemic. At the same time, and I think this gets to the point that you're making, Jay, is that if you take a map of Baltimore City, for example, and you can do this with any U.S. city, I have yet to see one that this does not work with, and you take the red line maps. So the maps that the Home Ownership Loan Corporation created in the 20s to decide which neighborhoods deserve federal loans and which ones don't, which are considered risky. And what's really problematic about these is they decided that neighborhoods of color, neighborhoods with immigrants, neighborhoods with ethnic groups were risky neighborhoods to invest in. If you take those maps, those areas that are outlined in red that say do not invest in this if you're the federal government, and you map on the Alice data, it's the same thing. It is the same pattern you saw 100 years later. And so I bring that up because it gets to this point of COVID and what happens there. Cumulative disadvantage is a term we don't talk about very often in our culture, but what happens in 1920 when you do that, you've now started a disadvantage in communities of color.
Right.
You are now, every extra disadvantage is only multiplying this thing. Everything, like say COVID, businesses are going to struggle more than those that didn't have to struggle with them in the first place. So while we don't have data necessarily, and it's a weird thing where there was a lot of money moving in different places, there's just not enough to understand yet what fully happened and what's going to happen. I would guess for at least another 5 to 10 years. It's such a weird data period.
Yeah. I think this idea that we had 2 years of this and that there was going to be no sort of lasting, systemic effects is a pretty oddly generous way of looking at time, and it just did not work that way.
Right.
But I appreciate that your data is at least capturing some of that. I do have another quick question. One of the more interesting, I mean, it's all pretty interesting to me, but one of the sort of striking finds is that single female led households, they hit the threshold at 69%, compared to 18% of married parent households. What are some of the factors that are kind of driving that? I mean, that's a massive gap. Like, what are kind of the factors that you guys have found driving that difference? It could be for either one of you. It doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it's some of it just so intuitive. When you have a single person trying to drive a a household with two children, right? Especially if one's an infant, one's a toddler, they're requiring different needs. So one may be preschool, and one may be just getting someone to take care of them, right, and start to work on their frontal lobe and get them to respond to activity and motion. That's a lot just for a household of two parents, right? And maybe even a grandparent in a household, right, to manage those two youngsters at those ages. Just the demands on a single person is just overwhelming, and especially when you have the constraints of not being able to work, maybe some of the hours you need to work to pay your rent, to pay your transportation, and all that. So you're constrained. You've got to leave your workplace, or maybe your second job, depending on what your structure is, to get to the place of where the actual childcare is occurring. And so it's a constraint that's so real and palpable. And every single person, whether male or female, obviously most of them are female, but it is very, very often overlooked by lots and lots of institutions in our society. And so we, United Way, are just trying to present the data in a sort of non-biased way that just gives people who are looking to find action steps, whether it's policy or investment, they actually have something that validates what's being proposed, right? And so many of our legislators are so appreciative, and some of them, Jay, some of them are actually calling us, and you would respectfully understand this, Aleksey. Many of them are calling us to find out when is that next report, that next update coming out, right? Because it becomes part of their lexicon. Even the Governor Moore and so many other senators in the state and delegates, they're using the Alice report sort of almost chapter and verse to support, hey, we need to do something with transportation or utilities or, that sort of thing. And so we feel that weight as well to make sure we're providing as comprehensive, as sort of varied enough in terms of the data, which is why we do the look-sees of seniors and a full household with two parents and two kids versus a single person with three kids. We do that look-see so people get a sense for various paradigms. What is the impact, right? I don't know if you want to add to that, Aleksey, in terms of a bit more what you've seen and working with the research groups that we work with to compile this.
Yeah, there's some interesting dynamics at play here that are I cannot simplify down in the context of this podcast. There's just so much research in particular around single mothers, in particular within that group, single Black mothers, and the history of poverty and a history of disadvantage. Some of the things that lead to that large percentage, and Franklyn touched on this for both single fathers and single mother-headed households, you have one income stream, right? I mean, it is much easier to get by when you have two income streams. Franklyn also touched on this, the need for childcare, most likely. So oftentimes, and historically, after 1995, you cannot receive cash welfare without either working or searching for work. So when we went from AFDC to TANF, which we currently have, and there's also a 5-year limit on that, non-consecutively, you need some type of work situation. And so what happens there is then you're looking for childcare. And childcare is expensive. If anyone has kids, I do not. Part of the reason I don't is because childcare is expensive, right? And we're seeing people have less kids. It's because childcare is expensive. And what do? You need two people working in most situations in order to survive. For a family of 4, for 2 kids in childcare, it's around $2,000 a month is what the Alice budget says. And some people are going to see that number and say, where? I want that childcare. That's pretty cheap, right? That's a problem. And so when we think about folks who are struggling to make ends meet, in particular one income households who also have to utilize childcare, what happens there? Now, there's also a lot of really interesting research on, because the federal poverty level is so low, it actually in some cases disincentivizes folks getting married and being a 2-parent household. Because suddenly you're going above that level if you bring in that second income. And next thing you know, you've lost all these benefits to survive. So there's a push-pull there that is, and that's why I say we could go into this for hours, and it's just a really fascinating dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, and this will be, and I'll pass it to my co-host.
No, I'm enjoying it.
Okay, fair enough. So, I mean, I do think, Aleksey, you're bringing up something that's really fascinating, which is this idea that some people choose not to be married because simply being married pushes you into this kind of, like you said, into this threshold where then you're getting less federal funding that you may need. I just think about this movie from the 70s called Claudine, which was basically about that, right? And it was like, why are you marrying this woman? It's like, if I do, all of our kids, we're going to be destitute because the only way we're surviving is through these federal funds, and it's not enough if we get married, so on and so forth. But I think a lot of times there's conversations about, especially minority groups, black people very specifically, is why, the destruction of this black family. But there are people who are literally incentivized, de-incentivized to have these marriages and things like that because they cannot survive if they do. So I appreciate you bringing that up because I do think people just think of it as like this kind of not a socioeconomic thing, but just kind of like people just don't want to get married. It's like just for random reasons, or they don't want to have kids because they want to be out partying. It's like, no, I can't afford childcare, or and there are real thought processes of what happens when I make these choices. What happens to my family or to myself in that case. So the data seems to show that
you could worry yourself to death, or you could change your mindset, right? And I'm not saying that everybody in poverty or below that level right now has a certain mindset, because that would be unfair to say. But how you look at everything is how anything begins to change. And I think for United Way, this is what I'm hearing, that they're changing mindset. When you're saying, I'm trying to live, not just survive, what does thrive mean? Like, where does that fundamentally come from, and how can you begin to believe that that can be achieved, if that makes sense, Franklyn and Aleksey? Because people were having kids back in the day with less money. People used to say if you all sat down to eat, there was always enough. It was always community, church community. It was, civic organizations and different things. It seemed like it was always a way. But if you box yourself in mentally, there really is no way. So maybe speak to your position on how do we move out of the survival mindset in a time when you really need to survive, but you can't be there. You have to really transform your thinking to another place.
I would answer. Thank you, Impeccable. I would answer there in two different main points. One is for us at United Way Central Maryland, and there may be some other United Ways across the country as well. We have essentially said about a decade or so ago, we have to start attacking the issue one community at a time. So we started with one family stability site, right? And the caseworker was assigned to, depending on the nature of the casework, anywhere between 30 to 50 families that they're responsible for. When I say responsible for, I mean literally every aspect of their life. It's not just the core things that we tend to think about. I mean, every nuance, mental health, like how do they get the support they need there, right? So we said it's very, very important as a value to get at the core of your question, Impeccable, to over time start scaling, the impact. So you go from one community to another community, you just keep compounding. So you go from maybe helping 30, 50 families a year, in one program, to 3 programs, 5 programs, 8, trying to get to a place where the numbers start speaking to themselves for the funders. And that was the question you were raising, right? So the foundations, individual contributors, government, they're all saying, companies, they're all saying, it seems like you, Franklyn, you and your team, it seems like you at United Way have a system that's working, that's getting the kind of numbers like, 50, the last number I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, Aleksey, the last number I saw with the number of households that are in our family stability program, it was nearly 60% of them have had documented cases of increased incomes, right? And then 99.4% of the families remain stably housed. And this goes all the way back to 2012. So think about that. If you've got a system that essentially is saying almost 100% of the people that enter the system as remaining stable so they can build upon that life, get a better job over time, make more money, have better access to healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So for us, the answer truly is, and we can't do it alone, but from our lens, the answer is, how do we continue to scale programs and initiatives like family stability that get families to a place where they're not looking back in the rearview mirror. They're constantly looking forward. They're trying to figure out, like, how do I get my child to get from middle school into a good high school and then off to college and career, and that is what we've been focused on for some time now, and it's been very helpful. Aleksey, I don't know if you want to weigh in and add to that.
Yeah, I think there is, and Franklin, what you're talking about a little bit, and something I've been thinking a lot more about lately, is the idea of hope, right? And especially in these communities where, if you're a family that's in crisis mode, right, you're not thinking about what's next, to Franklin's point, where your kid's going to college. You're thinking about, where am I eating tonight?
Yeah, right.
And measuring, as a data person, measuring hope, that's a hard one. Right. It's really difficult to understand the impact of, even in those family stability sites, having a case manager or a coordinator who cares about you, who's asking questions, who's asking how your kids are doing, who's trying to support you. That's really difficult, like, to have today. And so when you do have it, that feeling, that ability, like, someone cares about me, I wish I could measure it, because I think it would be easier for us to report out. But the impact of that is really hard to understand a decade down the line. To another point, Impeccable, you mentioned kind of that community. All of our data suggests, and that COVID made this way worse, that the communities have kind of disappeared. So whether it be, there's a great book, well, maybe not great for a non-academic audience, called Bowling Alone, from the early 2000s, where we used to have bowling leagues, and this is across the US, across racial demographics. And it's an example of something that just kind of went away, right? And you think about all of these community organizations we used to have, people coming together, they've disappeared largely.
Third places.
Yeah, third places, any places where you get that social support.
Right.
Yeah, that's your bowl. There you go. I think we need to bring bowling back.
I was
but
thinking
it's
about
too
Fred
expensive.
Flintstone. I'm sorry, you guys.
Right, but those places where people were able to come together and share support and build those connections, when they've largely disappeared, and we see this especially with young people today, where do you gather as young people, right? And we get into trouble in situations where folks are worried about, there isn't dedicated places for that, to build that relationship. So both of those things, I think, are really important to understand. We need those dedicated places. We need those dedicated communities. And also, we need to continue doing work that tries to inspire hope in the face of crisis and survival.
Well, if you could take that model of the 99%, almost 100% success rate, and maybe have a way to apply it. I mean, back at the church I used to belong to, we called it a transitional house. Well, like, we had bought a block of homes, and people who at a certain point in their life, maybe had a bump or what have you, they stayed in the transitional house. Is that kind of the same thing? And then they transitioned out once they were able to do X, Y, Z, to do certain things. Because to your point, like you said, Aleksey, if a person is hungry, they don't want to hear, "I'm going to pray for you." They can't think at the moment, you know what I mean? Because they're so hungry, and that main need is not that prayer is not important, but it doesn't rank up there when you're hungry at all. So the resources of everybody who does give, thank you.
And Impeccable, let me just add to what you're saying, because I meant to say it before, which is, and you can imagine this if you picture it, right? A person who's been in a very difficult position for some time, and they're just used to sort of scrapping and trying to just make things work that day, right? To just get by for them, their family, their children. But when you get them to a point where they're now starting to save, they're starting to save money, and they can look at their bank account and see it. They go, wow, so 3 weeks ago I was at 500, now I'm at X, right? And then they're saying, well, I'm in this apartment now, but what might it look like if I get a single family home or townhome or 2 bedrooms, whatever? But then they're rushing. So that caseworker, that life coach is so important, because They're saying, don't just try to work to get the bare minimum saved so you can qualify for internet home, right? Because you don't want to be house poor, as the saying goes, right? You want to get to a place where you have maybe a little bit more, so you can put more down towards that entry, and it puts less pressure on other obligations you have too. So it's like the ongoing education, which allows them, to your point, allows them to move from one place of residency to maybe a higher grade place, but still have a safe harbor. So they're not running from a safe place and then acting inappropriately financially, economically, and then they're back on the street scene because they haven't paid their mortgage, or you know what I'm saying? So it's a real thoughtful process, which allows those numbers to be so high, to your point, right? Is because we put a lot of sweat equity, if you want to call it that, into each family in their household, right? Yeah.
And in terms of housing, and really any big financial purchases, there's a lot of predatory stuff targeting the Alice community. Predatory auto loans are something from the data I'm very worried about. We're looking at defaults that are surpassing what the housing market was in 2008. So there's a reckoning coming there. And a lot of it is these 20-30% auto loans for a 2010 Honda Civic that only exist because of predatory lending. Similarly with housing, with payday loans, things like that are, coordinators can say, hey, there are better ways of going about this that aren't going to put you in a hole. And to Franklyn's point, what happens when you buy that kind of forever home? You're now building community. You're meeting the neighbors. You're building neighborhood associations. You're bowling with your neighbors, right? You get in the Flintstone and Barney Rubble situation. So I think that's really important to consider.
I think you guys touched on a key word, and that was care. Sometimes people just want to know that you care a bit, and that can turn, that can definitely turn a corner. I was losing the quote about you don't know how much something until they know how much you care. I can't think of it. Maybe
people don't care how much you know,
right?
Until they know how much you care, right?
There you go, Franklin. Well, I told you were co-host. You read my mind today.
Franklin classic right there.
It's been an exciting yet very needed conversation, and we are really thankful and grateful. Like you guys said, we could go on for years. I mean, they haven't moved the bar for 100 years, basically. Oh yeah, we raised it a little bit. No, you haven't done anything. So I'm going to ask. Let me see. I'm going to ask my last question. Let me see what I had written down. If you had to put one of the Alice tenets or strategies on the lawmakers of today's seat in Maryland, which one would you think would be the most important?
You already know my answer, Impeccable. Housing, man. And the specific answer is any new housing starts, make sure they're proximate to transportation. That is so like the places where historically a lot of homes have been built is so frustrating for a family when they've got to tack on an additional inconvenience. So if you're able to pass policy that affects builders in a way where they're incentivized for credits, et cetera, but then they're also incentivized from the standpoint of knowing that community is expecting new housing stocks to be close proximate to transportation. That's one that I would add. I don't know if, Aleksey, you have another one or
like choosing between kids. I don't have any, but housing's a really great one. But since Franklin took that, I'll also throw in childcare, because I think our data is suggesting there's a looming childcare crisis. I mean, we're in the crisis. It's only going to get worse from here. Between less childcare facilities than ever before, because it is not a well-paying, it is not a career that you get rich with. Even if you own a childcare center, folks are struggling. Between that and more need for childcare, we are quickly emerging to a crisis point, and not just in Maryland, but across the country, where we're going to really have to decide how we invest in this thing in order to get folks not just to have childcare, but good quality childcare. Because the research shows if you have a kid who has good quality childcare versus a kid who doesn't have good quality childcare, the kid with the quality childcare is going to do far better in life. So making sure it's both quality and affordable.
Alexa, you know a lot about the children, huh? Okay. Somebody's pulling on your coattail. Next time we show up, what he's like, yeah, Kev, I have 3 kids now, and
And I think the problem is I know too much about how much it costs to have kids.
Yeah.
So
listen,
Ignorance is bliss.
yeah.
There you go. Right.
Don't let it stop you to a person whose family has 6. Okay, so
Oh,
we have 6. So I don't want to hear about your woes. So just go ahead and
Bite the bullet, huh?
it'll work out. So Jay, last question, and then we'll let you get on the box and anything that you want to share, and we'll wrap this day up.
All right.
On the chicken box.
All right. One, I love data. I have 1, so there you go. That's the difference. So my last question is, and this is going to be, I want you to be as honest as you can be, which is the report ends with a call of action to community members, nonprofits, employers, and policymakers. Realistically, who isn't doing their part, and if they were doing their part, what would that look like? And that's a question to both of you.
I would say it's hard to slice it by like delegate and their team support, senator and their team support, right? Their legislative aide, their chief of staff, others that are helping them. It's hard to sort of slice between that. But I would say there are so many lobbyists who are very disruptive, to the system, right? Mm-hmm. We use our own lobbyists, for our issues, healthcare, childcare, et cetera, housing. But there's so many of them with disparate aims and agendas that leverage their voice in a way that it produces unfair outcomes, right? Because they either have those private conversations that make the person who's listening that works for Senator X or legislative official Y feel like this is the majority of people in your district or the majority of people in the state, right? So they're skewing results relative to legislative policy that's created. And I think that I don't even know how you get rid of that, because as long as there is free space to have lobbyists in our country and in our states, that's always going to be the norm. But I think it's one of those sort of unspoken, very dangerous things that unless we get our arms around it, we're going to continue to see some of the unfair, unfortunate decisions being made because outsized influence,
Right. And I'll tailor my question a little bit differently to Aleksey. Is there, in the data that you're seeing, are there gaps in, let's say, state funding or federal funding and things like that that kind of show, well, if this has increased or this has been cut, this is where, this is causing more, economic pain? Do you see anything like that?
Yes. Okay,
yes, and how much? Yes, and how much time do we have? That sort of answer.
So, it's a big question, right? Sure. Because there are so many things that have to happen in order for us to support folks in the Alice community. And since around 1980 on, we have disinvested from our social safety net. Like, you just see the amount of money we put in disappear. Our entire tax structure, our entire economic system has shifted drastically since 1980. And it's all affected the Alice population, whether it be, we have 90% tax brackets in the 70s going down to 30-something% in 2026. Whether it be manufacturing jobs in Baltimore City that are now in Southeast Asia or other locations, right? So all of these things have shifted so drastically that it's hard to pinpoint one thing and say that's what's going to cause it. At the same time, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are all things that I would be very worried about today. SNAP benefits, all of these things have moved and are going to continue being kind of driven away. And there are going to be negative outcomes for that. So I think we're really at an inflection point here where all of us, lawmakers, individuals, advocates, need to think about the human being behind the stories. And so oftentimes we talk about these issues in abstract. There are human beings making logical decisions, trying to make ends meet. And the more we treat it that as the case, as opposed to these abstract, oh, people are doing this thing, I think that is kind of where we need to push our push everyone to be better around those issues if we really want to address this Alice crisis.
Thanks. I appreciate that answer. All right. So I guess this is the segment right now, because I know we're tight on time here, for you guys to kind of give your last thoughts. So I'll push it to Franklin and then
Sure.
Aleksey. I think we'll just let you guys close out just because I know you guys are tight on time here. So
Sure.
Franklin, go
So
ahead.
I think on the box, chicken box, I'll go back to your comment, Impeccable. What drives the work for me and a lot of my colleagues here at United Way is that quote I mentioned. You know, people truly, they really don't care how much you know, right? Until they know how much you care. How we show up in community and neighborhoods, work with residents, community associations, et cetera, means the world to them. Sometimes people just not like knowing that they're being seen and heard and valued. That means a lot to people in the community. And so for us, we have been building that sort of brand identity. This is a group of people that have a lot of knowledge, but more than the knowledge and information and data, they really care, right? So that's what we need more of in our society, in our region, our state, and in Central Maryland is more and more people that are convinced that there are other people that really care about their plight and trying to do things, whether it's public policy or more investment, right? Structural investment that helps them get to the next place. So that's my chicken box comment.
Okay.
All
fair
right,
enough.
we'll slide the couch over to Aleksey.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what Franklin said. I talk about Alice data a lot, and it's disheartening, right? You're seeing data in large quantities that show you folks are struggling, folks who are doing all the right things, who are going to work, spending 40 hours at one job, then going to another part-time job, who are taking care of their kids, who are trying their best and they can't get by. And it's really, really depressing at times. I think like that is a normal reaction to have. But the message I want to, my chicken box kind of message here is that doesn't mean we should be apathetic. It doesn't mean we should give up. If anything, it should be a call to action, to Franklin's point, to care more about people, to care more about these issues. The first step is to understand that something isn't working here. And it's not working for a lot of Marylanders. It's not working for a lot of Americans. So our job is then to address it, whether that means voting to ways you think you can address it, whether it means supporting organizations like the United Way of Central Maryland, whether it means engaging your local officials, building community, start a bowling league, right? All of these things, we have the capacity to make these changes. We are human beings, and that is the amazing thing about us. We can make a decision today and go and do it. So not being apathetic, but it's a call to action there of do something. Don't give up.
Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. This has been a fantastic conversation. Um, and it's things out there. I saw a friend of mine that started a platform called Pad Split. I don't know if you guys have heard it, but it's where people are now renting rooms in homes, which is making it a lot easier than just having a home, and it's even building some kind of community. So
Mhm.
a lot of people I know with houses now, they do it a lot in the student college area where they would rent rooms, but they're taking homes and they're splitting the pad, and so sharing common areas. Uh, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what made me think of that, but when Franklin kept saying housing, there are ways to look at things differently. And first it was Airbnb, where your home became, the hotel became your home, and now it's even to the point where the rooms in the home are becoming some people's home, which is a lot better situation than they are as they transition to maybe wanting to have their own place. You have to want to as well. So, as I always say, continue to care about people. What can you do? You can impact one person's life without money by just saying something kind,
Mhm.
showing care, doing a random act of kindness. I always say, call a senior. They do not want to hear a text from you or see a text. Unless it's a video, they'll watch it. But I'm saying this, get personal. It's too much AI going on. Just call a person up, let them hear your voice, and literally ask them, do they need anything? And you're like, it's going to inconvenience my day. I don't want to go over there and do whatever, whatever. I mean, but I'm telling you, when you're gonna get older prayerfully one day, and you're gonna hope somebody calls you. You know, you grandma or auntie or uncle, he over there in isolation sometimes, not getting any love. And so I think that it's kind of United Way, spreading that same message of love to more people. But what can we do? We can stand by each other and help the people that are in our vicinity. The people that the United Way can't reach, we can reach. So that would be my message. Jay Jackson, Franklyn Baker. I'm not driving today, you know, my bus. I was in the school bus last time. I'm just kidding. My yellow whip, you know, they're on sale now. I'm just joking. Aleksey, what's the data on that? How many people are getting school buses instead of SUVs, right? And we can save on transportation, selling seats, you know. And I just gave somebody a bus business idea. That's a new Uber
There you go.
tour, the bus. All right, I like it. Until next time, Aleksey, you'll have a child by the next time I talk to you, and everything will be all right. Look at it. Close your mouth, Aleksey. You know?
My mother and mother-in-law would be really happy about that. So.
Yeah, they're ready for one. They're gonna help you. They're gonna jump right in with money you didn't even know they had. Believe me, the grandparents always come through. So until next time, go to afro.com, get a digital subscription. We really need your support so that we can continue to bring information to the community so that we in the next 134 years as well. Until next time, everybody have a fantastic day. Take care.
Thank you.